think that's very deeply ingrained, and I think we have to foster much more of it among Jews who don't have that awareness. To me, Jewish living is about a sense of covenant and mission. Yes.
So
I don't know that that diverges completely from Kaplan. I would love to hear Kaplan's response to what I just said. I can't imagine he would say absolutely not.
Right. No, I think you're probably right about that. And to shift just briefly to Israel in terms of the state of Israel.
I just want to add one thing. Yes, but there is, this does mean I do not accept the normalization of Jewish life, which was once the goal of a part of the Zionist movement.
Acculturation into
that we would be a people like all peoples, and that's good and healthy, and we have to get away from our abnormality and be normalized. No, I don't think we should be normalized.
Right. So in terms of the state of Israel, you write here, you spend a lot of time talking about your concerns about the state of Israel, but you do say, to say that I accord the state no messianic status, which you assert, does not mean, however, that I refuse to find meaning in the fact of its existence. And in fact, you say here that in general your approach to history is to try to find meaning even if you don't believe that it's destined or determined by some outside divine source. What is for you the meaning of the state of Israel's existence?
Well, it's the Yerushalayim side of Bavel v'Yerushalayim. It's the Jerusalem side of Babylon and Jerusalem, and that means it is a place where Jewish identity comes first. It is a place, therefore, which is a pressure cooker of thinking about Jewish ideas and what the Jews should do in the world and how Jews should be and so on. Our existence as diaspora Jews is always, by definition, a dual existence. We are Jews and we are Americans. We are Jews and we are whatever we are. In Israel, there is a chance, even though Israelis should be both Jews and Israelis in the sense that it's a democratic state, nevertheless, it is a state somehow that privileges the Jewish, and I think that's in some ways what it's about. Which is not to say more rights for Jews than non-Jews in the state, please understand, I don't mean that, but that it devotes itself, for example, to the development of Jewish culture and Hebrew language and Hebrew books and things like that, that they, as the Hungarian government cares about the development of Hungarian literature more than it may care about other things, I think the Israeli government should somehow promulgate Jewish existence, promulgate Jewish culture. Listen, I also am enough of a rememberer of anti-Semitism to say that the Jewish people is represented somehow in the whole of nations is not a small thing.
One more question and then I'm going to open it up. Toward the end of the book, you describe what you yourself refer to as a kind of post-halachic perspective. You say, I am one of many Jews for whom the old halachic rule book fails to work. I find it far too detailed, too restrictive. Its concerns with ritual and minutiae and taboo overwhelm me and raise the specter of a civilization fallen victim to obsessive compulsion. Is there a
Pretty
place...
strong language,
It's
I
strong
admit.
language. But here's my concern, and with this I will conclude my questions and open up. Here's my concern. Is there room in your postmodern radical Judaism for a radical halakha? Meaning, is it that the whole halachic construct is doomed to failure, to fall victim to this obsessive compulsive disorder? Or in fact, is there an opportunity to develop, as many people I think are hoping, for some new form of halakha that still has a kind of structure and normativity that allows Judaism to be passed on and to be shared?
Yeah, very essential question. You can't have a Judaism without halakha. That is to say, there have to be norms about how we live. But Some things I think can be reformed from within. Some things I think we almost have to begin from the ground up. The whole area of Seder Nashim, the whole area, the sixth of the Talmudic corpus that deals with women. I don't think that woman exists anymore. And I'm glad that that kind of woman who was traded among men, who was always under the domination of one man's property rights or another's, that woman's gone from the scene. And I don't think we do well by saying, okay, we can make a little change here because we found a precedent in the 13th century where somebody said, okay, everybody can be called up, even women, so somebody said it in the Maharam, somebody said it in the 13th century, therefore we can find a precedent.
I buy that. But what
I think in some areas, we have to start over.
But Art, I don't see you calling for the development of a new halacha. That's what concerns me. That you criticize that old form, and I think I feel very sympathetic to that criticism. The question is there a project that we have to undertake to reestablish, reconstruct, rebuild a halachic system that can at least speak to us?
Yes, there is. That project needs to be undertaken. I can't say it's my project because I think it needs to be undertaken. Okay. It needs to be undertaken. We need a new Agadah and a new halacha. The new halacha will only come out of the new Agadah. As Bialik says, the halacha is the quintessence of an Agadic process. So I'm sort of trying to develop the Agadah here that has to become a halacha. Shabbat. Shabbat is the great institution of Judaism. I love it. But I remember in my more pious days getting so caught up in the, can you do this, can you do that, and so on. And every time I turned around, I found myself constricted, and I was tremendously liberated when I broke free from that. That doesn't mean I don't think Shabbat needs forms. I think it does need forms. So in one of my books, I gave some ideas for 10 ideas for a contemporary Shabbat. We've got to have a Shabbat where you can't operate your computer on a Shabbos clock. That's not the way to go. Let me end there.
Okay. So I'm going to end here too, and I want to open it up. And again, be briefer than I have been, if you can. Okay, we're going to take some questions. Leonard.
First of all, thank you. Thank you both. Art, as I understand it, the minimization of the importance of the other is because essentially, in your way of approaching this, there is no other. The other is part of the one, hence part of me, hence the concept falls.
That doesn't happen in daily life, you understand. I recognize that you are you and I am me. There is a level of sanity in which otherness and decency in which otherness is fully required.
But that was where you came down on the ethical mitzvot and their motivation. I've always thought that Bayom Hahu Yeh Hashem Echad is about Yom Hahu and not Yom Hazeh.
The future.
And a kind of Acharit Hayamim. And then we will know about oneness and what it means. So let me take you for a brief moment back to Levinas, who says, to know God is to know what must be done. Now, Levinas, the celebrant of the other, derives a principle that I should think you would be sympathetic to, even though it's problematic, because the people who demonstrate in front of abortion clinics know what must be done by their lights. So I don't see that the rest of what I've learned tonight, which is substantial, is contingent on this notion of oneness that seems so central to your perspective. Nothing that I heard you say about Israel, or for that matter about Torah, hinges on oneness.
Interesting. I would expect a very interesting, challenging question from you, Label, so thank you, and thank you for being here. In terms of my own perception, it all comes out of that. That's the most important thing. That's the beginning place. I came back to Judaism, I think, when I read that in the Tanya, that it quoted that verse from Deuteronomy, V'yadata hayom v'hashevota levavecha, know this day, we say it in the Aleinu, know this day and set it in your heart, that God, the Lord, is one in heaven above and earth beneath, ein od, there is nothing else. That blew me away totally. And that was my way back into any kind of religious language. And so therefore, for me, in terms of the gestalt of my own development and thinking, it all rests on that. The Levinas line of knowing God as knowing what to do, indeed can be read many ways and can lead dangerous places, as we see all over the world today. We have a principle in Judaism that's one of my few ultimate commitments, and that is the principle of Telemental, the principle that every person is the image of God. But people on both sides of the abortion debate rightly evoke that principle. And that commitment to that principle doesn't tell us which way to act in more than one case.
Another question. Yes, in the back.
What you said resonates so much, I got verklempt. I couldn't take notes. But, on the other hand, your description of the inclusive oneness of mystery sounds like a celebration of dependent arising, and I think you know what I'm talking about.
Not quite, no, you've got to spell that out a little more for me.
Okay, dependent arising is a basic Buddhist concept that includes everything that's happening in its oneness. I heard Thich Nhat Hanh describe, if you hurt someone else, you're hurting yourself in a different metaphor.
Yes.
But tell me the difference, oh Rabbi.
Why is it important to you that there be a difference?
I'm going to retreat so much.
Yes, I understand.
You know that.
What I'm saying is, in the postmodern religious world, I very much do not want religion to be a zero-sum game. I have the truth, therefore somebody else doesn't have the truth. My religion is right because your religion is wrong. Judaism is better than other religions because. I think all of those term papers are finished. So I do not mind sharing a certain part of the truth with Buddhists or with Sufis or with Christians of goodwill coming out of their mystical tradition. As a historian of religion, I wear a historian of religion hat. I taught in a comparative religion department at Penn for 12 years. One of the things we learn is that sometimes devotional mystics in Hinduism and Christianity might have more in common than, say, the rationalist Christian and the devotionalist Christian mystic do. In other words, they may share the same religious language, but the others may share a typology of understanding, a typology of experience that gives them a deep empathy with one another. So I do not object to the fact that I am fairly close to such distinguished Buddhist teachers as Jack Kornfeld and Sylvia Boorstein, and Joseph Goldstein, let alone Thich Nhat Hanh. My language, let me just say, my language is entirely Jewish. And I really learn these things from the Hasidic sources, which I study every day and spend my life translating, because I want people to know, as my Aunt Ruth used to say, how do you say that in Jewish? How do you say that in Jewish was a very important question in my family. Of course, it meant Yiddish in those days, but how do you say it in Jewish? How do we say some of these universal truths in Jewish language? And I would like to teach some of those Buddhist teachers I just mentioned also how to say it in Jewish. And this to me is entirely tied to my sense of the Jewish people and its mission, and therefore my commitment to that sacred peoplehood that I care about, which is something you can find at Kripalu Yoga Ashram.
Right. And they're not indistinguishable in your own
Right,
mind.
right. No.
Please.
Yes. No.
Right here.
Our traditional prayers of praise, petition, and thanksgiving are worded in ancient language and mostly refer to the kind of God that listens, answers, cares. So with the concept of God you described, what meaning can prayers and praying have?
A very important question, and I have been reinterpreting the prayer book on automatic pilot probably for more than 40 years. And that automatic pilot becomes a sort of deep part of you. I do not know a God who, in a purely personal way, hears prayer and responds to prayer. But when I'm praying, I am bringing my fullest self, including my most vulnerable self, to become open to the words, to become open to that moment. I want to call my most vulnerable self forth in that moment and have it be present. As that vulnerable self opens, it has concerns. It's worried about my sick friend. It cares about the destruction of the planet and so on. So I find myself using those words of petition to say, these are the things that are on my heart. These are the things that I am burdened with. And I bring this burden to your presence, which is to say there is a second person essential to Jewish prayer. Who is the you of my your presence? The you of my your presence is, and I say it pretty clearly in the book, is my personification of this oneness of being. Why do I personify it? Because I feel called upon to respond to it, to serve it, to be present to it as it is present in me. The way I know how to do that is in human language. I'm really ultimately talking about the mystery of the universe. But I'm still a human being, even though Heschel and I diverge to some extent about how ultimate the personal God is. I still understand as a human being who wants to open myself to that presence, I need to do it in human language. I therefore construct human images. I participate in our collective construction of human images, which serve as a kind of bridge between the self and the mystery. And to get to the mystery, you need to be open and vulnerable. But you can't do that without somehow a human reassurance of that vulnerability. So that becomes a kind of bridge language for me. And that in some ways is right out of Kabbalah, for those who want the footnote. The personal God is a bridge to Ein Sof, which is really the ultimate and beyond person. That's the best I can do. It's never adequate.
Wait for the mic.
Thank you. I wonder about your use of...
It's hard for people to...
Oh, I'm sorry. I wonder about your use of the word evolution. Darwin's discovery was of natural selection, and you were asking about your contribution. Your contribution, from that standpoint, is to have as many children as possible. A related concept, I might add, is the professorial profession, has as its kind of intellectual natural selection duty to pass it on, to take the collective wisdom that you have studied so hard and to try to ensure its survival and its prosperity against other people's concepts. So against that, how do you, can you rephrase some of what you said about evolution? Evolution was a meta-concept that came after natural selection. So I'm a little puzzled about your idea of being present in evolution.
So the Talmud says, Kol ha-melamed et ben chavero Torah ki'ilu yilado. If anyone who teaches somebody else's child Torah becomes a parent to that person. And in some ways, that's a bridge answer to the two parts of your comment. I understand that evolution would mean scattering the seed as widely as possible and having lots of descendants. But those descendants in some ways for me become spiritual descendants because I am trying to spread the ideas. I'm using the term evolution somewhat more loosely than you're requesting, but I don't believe that evolution ends. Evolution is only about biology. The evolution of our God concept, I believe, is an important part of the evolutionary process that does not stop once we have civilization. Civilization itself is involved in the evolution of its ideas and the evolution of the way it is. There's a quarter of this book in some ways is the evolution of the idea of God in Judaism and Western religion. And so I want my students to be participants in that evolutionary process, and that in some ways is why I scatter the seed of my teaching so widely.
Jonah?
Hi, Art. It's delightful and glorious and certainly comforting to think of the mystery that underlies the oneness of being, delighting in the natural forms that carry things forward. And so I ask, what about the forms that we might call stunted? Human beings who are born never to experience full awareness, or creatures that we might call the losers rather than the winners in evolution. And where is God in that?
There, as in the most obviously glorious, in no less measure and fully present. I have no theodicy to offer you about why some people are born stunted, or why some people die young, or why some people have seemingly tragic and meaningless lives. I believe that the same divine energy and presence and oneness of being radiates through all of them and can be seen in all of them. And it is our job to see as much as we can and to point out as much as we can and to help shine light into that person's life as much as we can, to make more of it come forth. It's there in no less sense and no less measure. I do not have a why. Why does God do this? Because I don't have a God who acts on those whys. The one is there in all the natural process with its transformative evolutionary victories, and with all of its blind alleys. What about all the species that have died out because they weren't the strongest or the greatest in the evolutionary mound of corpses that scientists talk about? All those species that didn't make it because they couldn't outsmart their predators or eat enough of their prey. They were somewhere in the middle of the system. That is the way it works. Do I know why it works that way? If I have a theodicy question, it's why did evolution have to happen in this aggressive, competitive way? Why couldn't more of it have happened in societies like ants and bees, where the beings have to work together in order to build? That's part of evolution, to be sure, but why is so much of it in the sort of bucking of two stags in the wilderness with their horns against each other, one ready to kill the other for the female or for whatever it is. I don't have an answer to. I don't have a why for that process. That is the biggest struggle area for me in terms of finding the divine in all this.
Albert Einstein was often asked what's his relation to God. His response was that he believes in God.
Yes, I remember.
In the sense that there is some boundary of knowledge and there is some powers beyond the human ability to grasp and understand. He didn't observe any mitzvah. He didn't eat kosher. He commented that he doesn't believe that a prayer can change the outcome of anything. And yet he said he considered himself religious.
Yes.
Now, rabbis who were called to comment on this concluded that he is not religious. The question to you is, where is Einstein in your scale of religiosity?
Yes, I have read some of Einstein's statements on religion, and I find myself very much in sympathy with him. I do not believe that you have to live a traditional religious life in order to be a religious person. One of the things I learned early on in the game is that the self-proclaimed religious and the truly religious are not the same set of people. Thank God there is still some overlap between them, but they are by no means exclusively the same set of people. And Einstein clearly was, to my mind, I'm no expert, but Einstein was, to my mind, a religious person in that sense, had a religious consciousness because of the sense of awe with which he treated the scientific process. And he, I'll leave Einstein there and say that I believe, and I think Einstein probably would have agreed, that kind of religious consciousness, that awareness of the mystery and awe in the universe calls upon us to act in certain ways, calls upon us to live in certain ways, has something to do with our ethical lives. And that for me is the beginning of building the bridge toward what, for me, not for Einstein, becomes a life of religious behavior.
A comment, if I may, and a question. The comment is, you also may remember that when Einstein was confronted with quantum mechanics, he said, God does not play dice with the universe. So choose that for however you thought he believed in God. May I ask
What
you,
does God play with the universe?
if I knew that,
Russian roulette.
I would donate much more to Hebrew College.
Please.
If, however you define this mystery that you have been calling God, could be conclusively proved to you did not exist, how would your life be different?
You know, I, in the process, did not have much confrontation with Jesuits, but I did have confrontation with Lubavitchers who tried to box me into a corner. If you say this, then mustn't that be true? And therefore, if I can prove this to you, then doesn't God have to do this? Proving, disproving is a chessboard I just don't play on. It's not about that for me. It's not about arguments. It's about openness to a certain level of experience. And therefore, it's about openness to a certain level of awareness of what life is. So it's not, you can prove to me there is a God, you can prove to me there ain't a God. It's just not something to which I would respond. So therefore, I don't think anybody could, at this point, prove to me that it does exist or it doesn't exist in a way that would change my life significantly, because that's just not the kind of mind I have. I'm utterly irrational.
So, as I listen to you talk, one thing that strikes me is almost a lifelong effort, it sounds like, to combine a modern sensibility and understanding of the world, like evolution and things like that, but at the same time to create or resurrect or come to a way to reconcile that with a religious perspective. And you've talked about lots of things. One thing you haven't really talked about that much that I'm interested in is how you think about death. And, given all of the modern perspectives of science, et cetera, what, in your thinking, what happens at the moment of death? How do you think about death? Is there life after death? Does consciousness continue to exist? Is that just part of the mystery that we don't know? How do you think about that?
Well, you think more about it as you get older, as you know. But as I said, early in my struggles over religion, I had to come to terms with the reality and finality of death. I found that the religion of my adolescence had been a way of trying to escape that confrontation. So in some ways, the beginning point of my new religious life was this was going to be a religious life that didn't play games about that. And I am still there. The fact of aging has not changed that. So I believe that the spirit is eternal and doesn't die, and it dwells in this body for a certain amount of time, and then it will go on and dwell in other bodies. And that spirit is the same oneness of being that enlivens all and that continues to exist in the infinite variety of human beings who are going to come after me. And I accept the release of that spirit so that it can dwell elsewhere. If some of those around me retain some memory, if I've left something behind in this world that another generation of people might read, I consider that, or hear, I consider that a great blessing, and that's kind of what I have to do in my life. I think most Jews, most modern Jews, even though we nominally have a belief in the afterlife in our tradition, most Jews agree with me that we live on through what we pass on to the next generation. That's what it's all about for me.
Amy?
So for the first time this evening, I heard you mention a word which is very important to me. And it was not in the context that I'd like you to reflect.
Shall I guess?
Sure.
Go ahead. Okay.
The word is memory.
Memory.
And I'm concerned, I'd like you to reflect a little bit. I think the concept of identity, individual identity and communal identity, is based in individual and communal memory. And I'm very concerned about more than one generation of Jews who don't have the kinds of quality Jewish memory, either individually or communally, particularly with regard to Israel. You don't have to focus on that, but I wonder if you could reflect briefly on how we who do feel the responsibility that you feel to pass on the extraordinary heritage that we have and are trying to learn about, how can we help create, or what will substitute for the essence of identity, which is memory.
Wow, you're an educator. You know all about that. Why are you asking me on some level? Nothing will substitute for it. We have to create memories. It's very hard to imagine ourselves as the grandparents whom our grandchildren, God willing, 70 years from now, when they're old people, will remember as being the ones who pass down the ancient memories to them, but that's who we are. I remember my grandparents who were born in the latter 19th century, who were raised in an Eastern Europe that was still undisturbed by the First World War. They left Europe before the 1905 revolution, and they in some ways came from that shtetl world which had its roots so much further back. I grew up hearing lots and lots of Yiddish around me and falling in love with it because I heard so much of it, sitting with my grandparents and Uncle David Meir and Tante Shifra Sarah on Saturday nights when the conversations were all in Yiddish and I was a little kid playing with the raisins in the bowl, listening to them. That's my ancient memory. My grandchild is not going to have that memory. I can maybe someday will be able to tell her about it, but it won't mean much. It'll be something Saba once said. But we will be that memory for the next generations that are passed down, and they will remember us as the ancients. Now, they will not have the natural links to the kind of old world of Jewishness that people like myself grew up with. And I realized when I started teaching at Penn, I realized, my goodness, I'm already teaching mostly fourth generation American Jews whose great-grandparents immigrated, whose grandparents were born for them the old country is New York or Baltimore or someplace. It's not Yupitz or Lumja. And that was already the beginning of a very different world. And we're now in fifth and sixth generation American Jews. And those are most of the people we're teaching. And we can't pretend otherwise. But if we have a rich Jewish life, and if we present that rich Jewish life in an attractive and interesting way, then that will be what they have to pass down to people living in a world that we can't even imagine the shape of. And that's the best we can do. I absolutely believe, yes, we are conveyors of memory. If there's one mitzvah, I was just speaking this weekend to another group, if there's one mitzvah Jews are really committed to, it's Vishinantam Levanecha. It's that we have a sense of something, teach them to your children. We have a sense that there is something we have to pass down. And Jews, I think, more than most other people, feel that our lives are somehow a transition between what my grandparents gave me and what I'm giving my grandchildren. And that there's a very strong sense of legacy, even for Jews for whom that soup has become water. There's almost nothing left to pass down. They still have a need to pass it down. I think that's why the terror that my grandchildren won't be Jewish is so hard for Jews. Because I will have somehow failed to pass that down. And so I think that's who we are, and we are transmitters of memory to a very large extent, and that's much of what we do in rabbinic education is transmit memory.
Thank you very much for this. I'm going to talk about two M words.
Two M words?
M words. Mysticism, I'd be very interested in hearing your concise definition, and meditation. And you spoke about Sinai perhaps taking place over a long period, 100 years, I think you said. And so what role do you feel meditation played with the prophets who developed all this?
My concise definition of mysticism is an element within religion, within all religions, that believes that the most important thing religion has to offer is the possibility of a direct, unmediated experience with God, with oneness, with the ultimate, whatever it's called. And the purpose of the rest of religion, the tales, the history, the practices, the rituals, is to lead one to such moments, and then to help one, very important, reintegrate such moments into ordinary life and to learn from them. But such moments, such unmediated moments of contact, are the core of what religion is all about. To get to such moments requires a kind of lifting of the veil. There is an outer layer of consciousness that is unaware, and there is a deeper layer of truth. The mystic believes that he or she has an inner life, and to get to that inner life you have to somehow penetrate a certain number of outer layers. And those are outer layers of the self, but they're also outer layers of the world, of our perception of the world. The relationship between God and the world for mystics is not that of creator out there and separate creation, but of surface and deep structure. Lift the surface and you'll find the deep structure, and it pulsates with the divine life. And I would say mysticism always tends toward oneness. Where I thought there were many, there turn out to be one. I thought there were 10, it's only one. I thought there was a trinity, they are all one. I thought there were 10,000 forms of Maya, they are all one. I think that's my definition of mysticism, those elements. And yes, mysticism comes out of a meditative consciousness, but it's not a particular act called meditation. There may be different kinds of inner religious experiences. There are ecstatics who do not sit quietly and meditate because they're too busy jumping up and down and screaming. That's also a form of religious experience. There are contemplatives, there are people for whom it's all about love and the pouring out of the soul in passionate prayer, and there are people for whom it's about quiet, detached forms of meditation. I think there are many different kinds of religious personalities and paths. And the prophets certainly had deep inner religious experiences. Some they reveal to us, and some they have perhaps wisely kept hidden.
And we'll take just a couple more questions.
Sorry for long answers, but they're big questions.
I don't know if I'll be able to ask this question so clearly. It's an important question to me. I'd like to ask you, from the standpoint of your theology, the way you understand the significance, the spiritual significance of the process of becoming fully human, especially in relationship to some of the great issues of the Kabbalists. I'm thinking particularly of Ratzon and Adam Kadmon. If that seems a relevant connection for the meaning of growing as a human being.
There is an acceptance of the single primal will, or the divine will, that is an important part of what religious life is, what any kind of religious life is, even this kind of offbeat religious life I'm talking about. Batel ritzoncha mipnei ritzonos, lifnei ritzonos, somehow. Negate your will before his will, I'm quoting it in the original intentionally, is still an important religious move to me, which is to say, we are individual egos, because we want, because we desire, because of the force of ratzon that is in our individual selves. But what the religious life is all about somehow is a transcendence of that individual ratzon, because we realize there is a bigger ratzon. There is a bigger ratzon, which is to say, the ratzon, the desire of that stream of life of which we are all part, which we need to recognize ourselves as part of, and therefore somehow live out what we come to understand is its will for us, is the way in which we participate in that bigger self, or in which we recognize that we are part of Adam Kadmon, which is to say, there is a single human of which we are all manifestations. There is one mainframe computer of which we are all workstations. There is a great mind of which we are all subminds, and that's what the religious quest helps one catch a glimpse of every now and then. And once you catch that glimpse, you start directing yourself toward living in the presence of that glimpse. I think that's about as much as I can say.
Okay, take two more.
You speak about the Judaism that you left behind and where you are now. Why, I mean, I'm not sure if you can address this, but why is it that so few rabbis think the way you do? Like sometimes when
I'm trying to make more.
I guess what I mean is it's almost like they're afraid of it, because when, like, if I speak to some rabbi, I mean, like if I go to synagogue or I go to shul, and I sometimes will go to different, the Mass Synagogue Council, because
They don't all talk like this, you mean?
the Mass Synagogue Council tries to bring all the perspectives, which I'm very happy for. But sometimes if you bring that up in your own shul, it's almost like it's afraid, or like you're not exactly stable. And so so I'm just wondering, what's your perspective on why that, and what happened to make that, to cause that eclipse and that division, since you say that all of the words that you relate to in your response to the woman in the back it all comes from that Jewish, from that history, from those roots. What happened? Where was the eclipse? Why are we so disjointed sometimes?
Talking about rabbis and synagogues, I want to say there is a certain conspiracy. The rabbi can't admit to his or her congregants what he or she doesn't believe, and the congregants can't admit to the rabbi what they don't believe. So we all pretend. I think there is a lot of that goes on in Jewish life. We all pretend. And that pretending has all kinds of forms. My friends whose difficult position and suffering I recognize in the modern Orthodox community have a big line between what you can say in shul and what you really kind of know. But they are certainly not the only ones who have that line. When it comes, for example, to the afterlife, a rabbi who has to be there for lots of people in times of mourning and loss probably should not get up so readily and talk about his or her disbelief in a simple notion of the afterlife, because some people really need to hear that and need to have that comfort, and I recognize that need. And don't ban it by any means, don't poo-poo it. I'm sensitive to it. I'm not talking to you here at a funeral, and I usually don't function in that aspect of the rabbinate, so maybe I'm a little freer. I got committed to a kind of tough intellectual honesty pretty early in my journey. The first paragraph of the book, I say, I'm a disciple of Rebbunim of Pshischa, who taught, do not cheat anybody, not even yourself. Lo tonu ishat amito. Don't jip anybody, not even yourself. And so self-delusion is something I try very hard to stay away from in theology. But the needs of people are very complicated, and the emotional levels on which Judaism and the synagogue and rabbis have to respond to those needs are pretty thick and complicated. So have a little patience for them.
One more question. We'll take it on this side over here. Choose it. Someone who hasn't had a chance.
Thank you both. I'd like to get back to something that was said about memory and Jewish education and the concern that Jewish children and all the young Jewish people coming in the generations to come will be missing something. I know Deuteronomy tells us to remember what we've seen and tell our children, and often it's not good news. And much of our history has not been good news. We are lucky to be in a country where we've been here for over 350 years without any kind of violent disruption of our continuity and our health. And this may be the first time ever, and we're not in our own kingdom, but we are, in a certain respect, in a kingdom that has allowed us to kvetch, to be creative, to figure this stuff out. And I wouldn't worry about the children, because we can just as easily restrain their creativity by our concern that they not forget this or that they not hear Yiddish. It'll play itself out in a way that I believe is creative, that'll serve the needs of young people to come, and it may very well not be in any way, it may not in any way look like the life we lead as Jews.
Art?
Yes,
just
go ahead.
one
Will
last
this become a question? Yeah.
One last diatribe.
Not a diatribe.
Much of our history is tsuris, and I would rather that children be happy and healthy, that they be necessarily religious or Jewish.
Okay, so Art, you want to respond?
I want them